pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver. It always comes down to that with you people. You wag your finger and you sneer. You say you sold out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. The irony is you say it like you wouldn't have done it yourself. I've had a belly full of it over the years, and I'm sick of hearing it. You don't know. You don't know what it was like. You weren't there. You can't understand what it was like. I mean, who were we? We were just a dozen nobodies. We were following another nobody. Our homeland, Israel, was under Roman rule. It was ground under Caesar's heel, and it was crushed by taxes that we had to pay just for the privilege of being occupied. We lived every day knowing that any Roman could say or do anything he wanted to your family, to kill you just for the sport of it. Nobody could do a thing. And we lived every day knowing that our own leaders, our fellow Jews, they bowed down to these Gentile savages just for the sake of keeping what little power they had. In times like that, when hope is such a rare thing to find, prophets, false prophets. There were 5 to the shekel out in the countryside, and it usually didn't take too long to figure out who they were, because they always fell. Then Jesus came along. Jesus came along, and he read the words of the law, and he read the words of the prophets with such authority. When he took a scroll and he read the ancient words, it was like the words jumped off the page and they came to life in his voice. And he could read them and he could understand and he could teach what he had read, just like the wisest priest, the wisest scholar that you ever heard. And when he wasn't preaching, when he wasn't reading, he had this way of looking at you. He looked right at you. With eyes that looked like they could see clear into your soul and deep into your life, and they would know who you were and what you'd done. You understand what that was like? Do you understand what it's like when somebody like that suddenly smiles at you, when he catches your eye across a crowded square? Do you understand what it's like when someone like that calls to you? When he singles you out and calls you out of the crowd, and for that moment, for that instant in time, you knew that you were the most important person in the world to him. That moment in time, you were the only thing he was focused on. When that happened, of course you followed him. When he called, of course you dropped what you were doing and you followed him. You followed him through 100 nameless towns, down 1,000 dusty miles of road, wherever he led. You followed him. It wasn't easy. You heard him preach. You heard the words and you heard the stories so many times that you could almost recite them yourself, but somehow they weren't dulled by the repetition. Because it was like every time he spoke them, he was speaking them new. And the neat thing was you could stand next to him. You could watch the crowd as they were listening, and you could see this eagerness in their eyes as they listened. And you could watch as they paid this almost like fierce attention, and they jostled one another trying to get close. to be sure that they could hear everything. And then there were the miracles. There were the miracles, the signs and the wonders that were a part and parcel of his ministry. I think that's what the people really came for. Either came to be cured or they came to see somebody else get cured. And with every day, in every village, in every wily confrontation with the authorities, you came to believe that Jesus was something special. Every day got a little more sure that here, finally, is the man that we've been promised, the one who would rise up against the Romans with us, the one who would overthrow our masters, the one who would make us free, who would restore the temple to what it should be and restore our nation to what it should be. And it was going on right in front of you, right in front of your eyes, and it was so powerful that you could feel it in your gut and in your soul. Here was a new beginning. Three years of that. Did you ever look at a mosaic? A picture that's made up of all of those tiny pieces? You know how from far off it looks like a picture, a very beautiful picture, but the closer you get, the easier it is to see the individual pieces that make up the picture. The longer it went on, the closer I got to Jesus, I started to see things. I started to see cracks in this picture. I began to realize that Jesus had no stomach for a fight. And he would match wits all day with the Pharisees and the priests, but when it came time for the real world, when it came time to talk about rising up against our oppressors, he had no stomach for that. Instead, he preached peace and he preached acquiescence. He preached humility in the face of oppression and meekness in the face of strength, as though those were something special. I came to see that he wanted the focus to be on him, on some kind of vague kingdom of God that he kept talking about, and not on the real world, not on this world. So the people, some of us anyway, those of us who understood, started to get restless, and we tried to speak to him about it, but any time we tried, he would shut us down, he would turn a deaf ear. As time went on, he became the message. And then when that girl, that woman, a woman of all things, when she anointed him with that very expensive oil, and she just wasted it. She poured it over him with no more thought than as if she was pouring water on him. And some of us went to him and said, "Why did you let her do that? Why didn't we take that oil and sell it for the poor?" He just ignored us, and he turned it around and he made it all about himself instead. He made excuses for this horrible waste, and that's when I knew that I've been wasting my time. That's when I knew that this man wasn't just a fraud, he was a dangerous fraud. Because he was the kind of guy that would get good people killed if he was allowed to continue on his ministry. Jesus had no place in this world, so I knew what I had to do. I went to the high priest and I told him what I knew, and he asked me if I'd be willing to turn Jesus in for 30 pieces of silver. Would I? 30 pieces of silver is almost half a year's pay for a common man like me. And I spent 3 years of my life following that man. So 30 pieces of silver is really poor enough pay for 3 years that I'll never get back. So of course I took the money. Who wouldn't? So I took the money and I led them to him. And then I watched him die. So 30 pieces of silver. Yeah, who did that? Can we keep a secret? After all that time, after all that disappointment and knowing how he had led us on and made fools of us with all his talk of peace, all his talk of serving others, after all that time and knowing what I know now, I would have done it for 10.